Welcome to Critical Junction, episode 57. I'm Mark.
I'm Luke.
I'm Jill.
And according to Christian doctrine, the Ten Commandments are a set of pronouncements from the God of the Bible from which Christians typically derive their morality. These include specific instructions to worship only one God, to honor one's parents, and to keep the Sabbath holy, as well as prohibitions against worshiping false idols, blasphemy, murder, adultery, theft, dishonesty, and coveting. From a secular perspective, one of the many problems with these pronouncements is that Christians will often leave the question of morality ill or undefined. When I talk about morality, I mean the evaluation of actions and consequences with respect to the well-being of conscious creatures. If we accept that definition, we begin to see that many, if not all, of the Ten Commandments either have nothing whatsoever to do with morality and should be considered amoral, and in some cases can be viewed as being completely immoral. The reason for such misunderstanding is rooted in the fact that Christians tend to adopt a black and white worldview, either something is moral or immoral, good or evil, because God says so and God is not to be questioned. As a result, they tend to forget that the world in which we live is not so easily compartmentalized, and the evaluation of actions and consequences with respect to the question of well-being depends entirely upon the situation in which that action is taken. Consider, for example, God's imperative to honor thy father and mother. The Christian would take this pronouncement as writ and would accept the morality of the commandment without question. But what if a child's father and mother beat that child to within an inch of death? What if they sold that child into slavery or the sex trade? Should that child still honor their father and mother without question because God says so? I would argue no, absolutely not. Or consider the imperative not to kill. Again, the Christian would take this pronouncement as writ and would tell you that because God commands it, there can be no exception to the rule. But what if one's life or the life of a loved one is in peril and the only way to escape that situation is to kill someone else? Should one then sacrifice one's life or that of the loved one because God says not to kill? Again, I would say no. Similar objections can be raised about every single commandment, as we'll discuss throughout this episode. Accepting the Christian black and white worldview as laid out in the Ten Commandments is incongruent with the realities of society and the human condition. The world in which we live is complicated and dirty and often confusing, and the morality of a given action needs to be evaluated according to each individual situation. Further, if the moral pronouncements laid out in the Ten Commandments are simply a matter of God's opinion and must be obeyed without question regardless of their actual moral value, what happens if God suddenly changes his mind about what constitutes a moral imperative? Let's talk about that, shall we?
Right, yeah. I would assume each time brings out different commandments. I would think like each moment in history would have different requirements in terms of ethical action and stuff like that. So yeah, it's difficult to tie something down like this. I when I was looking at them, I immediately noticed the thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife and thy neighbor's this and thy neighbor's that, and I'm just thinking, okay, so it's okay for like the like anyone that's not your neighbor, like you can covet someone that's not your neighbor, you know, like I can covet you're not my neighbor, Jill. Your wife's looking pretty damn good there, you know, in those jeans, kind of thing.
Well, that raises the question of whether the commandments mean neighbor figuratively or literally, as with pretty much everything else in the Bible, right? Yeah. It's open to interpretation.
I just Christianed it, didn't I? I was trying to make it black and white. All right, fine.
It's a good point, though.
Yeah, I mean, with the covet thing, I guess that's the 10th commandment, right? The last one.
That's the last one,
and that's like the most thought crimey of the
right.
of the commandments, because
most Orwellian of the commandments.
It's not about you doing something bad or prohibiting you from doing something bad. It's prohibiting you from thinking something.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just like that part in the Bible where if you look at a woman with lust in your heart, you've committed adultery, right? Another thought crime type of imperative.
Right.
You know, it's very Orwellian, this Bible thing.
Well, I do think that is something that Jesus himself brings up as well. He brings up the idea that we not only have to do good deeds, but think well as well, you know, and this comes up a lot in Buddhism and stuff, you know. It's about controlling your mind and not even thinking bad things, like to plant the seeds of goodness rather than the seeds of badness, and to recognize it and stuff like that, you know.
So that's more like psychological priming.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Well, I mean, set a good
foundation. To get you to live a good life, you have to redirect your thoughts to thinking well as
to cultivate goodness. To me, when I read the Bible, this is what I feel the foundational message of Jesus is: to cultivate good spirit, in a sense, like to be good, not just pretending.
You read the entire Bible?
Have I ever read the entire Bible?
Yeah, from like cover to cover.
I mean, I would suggest yes, but in the same way that I've seen every Walt Disney, cartoon, I've done it in segments, sort of thing. So yeah, sure, it's my toilet read, the Bible.
The toilet read.
Like right now, I'm going through the Jehovah Bible and all sorts of Buddhist literature and stuff like that. So yeah, sure, and they're always slightly.
When you say the Jehovah Bible, do you mean like the
Jehovah's Witnesses? Or?
Yeah. Like they're mentioning Jehovah a lot instead of Jesus.
I didn't know they had a specific Bible.
Well, yeah. It mentions Jehovah a hell of a lot.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, it's like I think it's the same as the New Testament, but it's just instead of being King James version, it's like
it's like they went with a spelling error and it took over.
Right.
Yeah.
Some language is kind of updated or whatever.
But yeah, you're right. Like the last commandment, the 10th one, really is thought crimey.
Yeah.
It's like
it's thought crimey and it's hypocrite because it's about like envy and jealousy, right? Basically, you're not allowed to be jealous of somebody else's stuff. But the ironic thing is like the top 2 commandments are about God being jealous because God is like, you won't have any other gods before me, and you won't make any
false idols, graven images, depending on which version you read.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's talk about that first of all. The completely amoral commandments. Thou shalt have no other god before me, no false idols, and keep the Sabbath holy.
Okay, before we go into that kind of nitty gritty, do you mind if I just go through all of the commandments one by one and just list them bullet point form right off the bat?
Can I just mention, looking at the Bible, they are not listed in point form. Like, in fact,
that's an interesting
the first bunch about worship me and only me, that's pretty long. And then the other ones are actually kind of point form.
Yeah. He goes on and on and on about how awesome he is as a god and how jealous he is, and then, by the way, yada, 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 all the other commandments.
Yeah. Well, you can pull the first 10 out of Exodus 20, but then Exodus 21 to 23 is just a continuation of further commandments,
expanding on how you can own slaves and shit.
There's nothing between 20 and 21 that tells you, oh no, these top 10 though are really the top 10, and these are the ones that you're supposed to keep and put on tablets in your courtrooms now. It's totally arbitrary, the idea that the 10 commandments are something special, that there's something special about the top 10.
Maybe it's because they were all lumped together. I don't know.
But that's just it. They weren't quite lumped together. They're not like listed point form. They're discussed in the weird Bible-y prose form, just as the following commandments are that come up later.
It's a weird kind of it's weird.
I do think that the way that the 10 commandments are thought of are probably influenced by the media or movies of the past.
Right. Yeah, it's all the fault of like the 10 Commandments movie.
Yeah,
Charlton Heston.
Yeah, it's all Charlton Heston's fault. He warped our brains.
Let my people go. Anyway, yes, let's list them off.
Okay, let's list them off. Do you want me to go in reverse or in?
Well, let's go in proper order and be as Southern Baptist preachy as you can get, just for the fun of it.
Okay, I'm not sure how pleasant this will be, but let's
I'll go
try.
right to talking in tongues.
So, Jesus! Anyway, yes, go ahead.
Number 1, have no other gods before me.
Hallelujah! Hallelujah!
Praise
Brother
Jesus.
Jill.
Number 2, no graven images.
Amen.
Or idols. Number 3, thou shalt not take the Lord's name.
Blessed be
in vain.
Blessed be thou, Brother Jill.
Number 4, remember the Sabbath.
I got nothing.
Number 5, honor thy father and thy mother. Commandment 6, thou shalt not kill.
No killing.
Commandment 7, commit adultery. Thou shalt not do that. Number 8, thou shalt not steal.
Holy number 8.
Number 9, thou shalt not bear false witness.
False witness.
And number 10,
The 10th commandment.
last but not least,
Definitely not least.
thou shalt not covet
Thou shalt.
thy neighbor's wife,
Not
or
covet.
thy neighbor's asses, or thy neighbor's
Wife's
cattle,
asses. Right.
There was ass.
or
Asses.
other property.
That was brilliant.
And that's
Well
it.
done.
Yeah.
Do you guys feel that any of these can hold up as being solid in any way that could be, not changed by circumstances?
Nope.
No.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think number 9, thou shalt not bear false witness. I mean, it's kind of artificially narrow and precious. I mean, he could have just gone and said, thou shalt not lie, but no, he's saying specifically,
Split it off into
thou
second
shalt
commandment.
not bear false witness. But I think that's absolutely a valid rule to say, you're not going to falsely accuse somebody else. And
Yeah, but that all works until you think of the Nazis knocking on the door, wondering where your neighbor is, and you going, yeah, I don't know where they are.
well,
But
that's
you gotta lie.
okay. So that's an argument for why it shouldn't be as broad as thou shalt not lie.
That's right.
But that means that thou shalt not bear false witness is still valid. Do you have an argument against that?
Well, how am I not being a false witness? I am saying I don't know where they are when
To
I
bear
do.
false witness is pretty specifically talking about not falsely accusing someone. So like not saying I saw specifically Mark do something bad.
I can neither confirm nor deny having done something bad.
Yeah.
Bad.
I still think it would still... you could still hold the same argument. There could be some argument formed based on some Nazi coming up to you going, did you see that person do that? And you know in your mind that they will kill that person just for
Yeah.
having done something possibly minimal and not deserving of death.
I would
Whereas
tend to
you
go
and I-
along those same lines.
No, but to deny that somebody did something that they're being accused of, whether or not, even though you don't know whether or not they did it, that's a different kind of lie. That's not bearing false witness as I think it's intended.
I just mean that I would
commandment.
be willing to bear false witness to protect someone's life, for example. Like I would go, I didn't see that person do that.
No, I'm saying to bear false witness means specifically to say that somebody did do something.
Okay.
And denying that somebody
Well,
who's
right.
accused
so
of
just,
something did
so
something.
just
That's not.
reverse what I mean then, in the sense that I can say that to protect someone's life, I could say that they did do something,
Okay.
whereas they might not have.
Like
they were to save their lives.
like giving someone an alibi,
Right.
a fake alibi.
Did
So
you
it's on record. Luke is willing to perjure himself.
Well, I think there can be arguments made against every single one of them. I can't think of one against the false witness thing at the moment, but I guess with enough thought we might be able to come up with an argument against it. But for the others, definitely, right? Well, the first three, the idol worship thing, the no other gods before me thing, and the
The Lord's name in vain.
right, those have nothing to do with morality at all. How are those moral
Yeah.
pronouncements? Right? Like, why is it more morally justified to have only one God that you worship? Why is it morally justified to not worship false idols or whatever?
Yeah, those are just really capricious kind of orders.
Right.
Like, I don't want you doing that. So there's
Yeah.
no moral dimension to them. It's just that I don't like it when.
So
you
it's
do
a
that.
god.
Yeah,
You feel like you're interpreting it to
No.
say that it's basically protecting the religion, protecting your belief in God, so that you continue to believe in God, sort of thing.
It's more like God just being a petty little
egoist.
bitch, and an egotistical little bitch,
A
and saying,
jealous egoist.
right, exactly,
Actually, those top three are to protect his
his own bloody ego.
precious right to break commandment number 10.
right, right, yeah.
Right, thou shalt not, because that's my job.
Yeah, that's my job to be jealous.
Yeah, and like I said in the introduction, you can make an argument against the honor thy mother and thy father thing just by virtue of
Oh, absolutely.
what it-
Yeah, right, by making him the mother and the father pieces of shit.
Right, yeah, like if
Just refer back to the Bible's own story of Abraham and his
Exactly.
sacrifice,
So it's
or
almost to
his
say
willingness to sacrifice
The,
his own
the
son.
Ten Commandments
until God said
presupposes that the Ten Commandments have been followed all along, and so everything's great in the world. And so then you can continue to follow the Ten Commandments and everything works out well. But if it's ever been broken away from, then you can't. It doesn't make as much sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a great point, Luke. Yeah, thanks. Thanks a lot. I'm such an eloquent speaker.
And the commandment against stealing. Again, you can make an argument against that one. What if you're stealing a loaf of bread to feed your starving family or whatever?
The Robin
what if you
Hood
Robin Hood it?
Yeah.
The Robin Hood argument.
Yeah. It's just these are.
The funny thing is that like all of these commandments are kind of there's situations in the Bible that actually have God ordering his followers to do something that on a literal reading of the commandments would be against the commandment.
Right.
So either they've got such a weird, narrow, specific meaning to each of the commandments where, like, thou shalt not kill, for example, just means specifically something about, like, not killing a person when I haven't ordered it, but you can kill someone when I've ordered it, or if it's to follow one of my general moral principles that I'm conveying to you.
I'm thinking about that. What do we not kill to eat? Like, we're killing everything.
In order to continue living,
everything
you
kills.
have to kill.
Right.
Everything kills.
Life feeds on life.
See, whether you're a carnivore or a vegetarian or an omnivore, everything you eat is something you're killing.
Right.
Yeah.
And depending on which version of the Bible you read, the
something
commandment can
living needs to die to feed you.
Yeah. And depending on which version you're reading, the commandment can also read, thou shalt not murder, which, murder by definition is unlawful killing. So having it as a commandment is redundant.
And I'm not sure that thou shalt not kill means thou shalt not murder.
Well,
because one of those commandments that comes up after the first 10, but that for some reason we don't really want to talk about, one of them actually is kind of more specific to what we would understand as murder.
Right.
Because it says, like, thou shalt not put to death someone who I think it explicitly says someone who I haven't said should be put to death, for your own purposes or something like that.
Which is why
if you take it upon yourself to take another person's life. So that one specifically about murder, which kind of begs the question, that first one that says thou shalt not kill must not be about murder because, I don't think God's in the habit of repeating himself.
Really?
Or maybe no. Actually, I mean, he definitely is in the Bible. But you would think if he's listing out the top 10 commandments, he wouldn't repeat himself within.
It's like a David Letterman top 10 list.
Right.
Or if he's listing out, what is it, like 500 basic laws or commandments in the Pentateuch, right? The Old Testament kind of list of things that includes, like, don't eat shellfish and all that kind of stuff.
Woven fibers or whatever.
Right.
Mixed fibers, sorry.
So you would expect that if he's giving you a list of those kind of rules, he wouldn't repeat himself within that same list.
Well, really, what really gets me about this, the listing of shit in a written format, is the all-knowing, all-powerful God of the creator of the universe decided to lay down the laws of his creation in verbal written form, in a language he knew would transmute and die off and change and alter itself, right?
Right.
You'd think he would have had the foresight to provide humanity with these things in a more reliable fashion. And yet, he didn't.
Or why not write his code onto the human soul to begin with?
Like if God had...
I mean, you could leave. You could sort of conceive of a concept where people have free will still, because that's apparently the get out of jail free card, right? You could give them free will while also giving them at least the instinct for what actually is God's commandment and what is against God, and then their free will would be about, like, you know what? I'm going to specifically go against what I know for a fact is God's wishes.
Right.
But that's not the way things work right now.
Hell no.
The way things work is that we kind of make it up as we go along, and then some people make claims that the thing that I have an instinct is the right thing to do must be a commandment from God.
Right. he could have easily altered the programming to make it such that we just wouldn't be able to break these commandments, while like you said, at the same time, still following that free will path with other things.
Well, we have to assume that these commandments were made because these things were occurring. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been stated.
Sure.
Right, exactly. But that's
it's kind of funny that
that treacherous thing about like God setting up his creation to fail. Like it's kind of sadistic. God's a jealous sadist.
Yeah. Well,
okay, so there's two wonderful attributes we've sussed out of the text.
He's an
God
egotistical little bitch, and he's a demented sadist.
Isn't that the thing though? It is the God of the Old Testament is an asshole.
Yeah.
And then Jesus shows up to basically go, okay, now he's not an asshole. Through me,
well,
no
actually,
more
it's kind of not quite even that. It's almost like Jesus is like, no, yeah, God was an asshole because he like when you look at these 10 Commandments, for example, like what some of what God says in the vein of the stuff about there being no other gods I sit up there alone and all this, and then Jesus comes along and he's like, yeah, well, nah, not really. I sit right next to you and I'm your son. And
so does that make me another god or also God? And they the early church had to reconcile those two problems. Then they decided upon
all this stuff about the Holy Trinity, is totally made up after the fact. It's not found in the text at all. But there's nothing in the Bible about the Holy Trinity.
No, they're like, well, the church was like, we have to explain this somehow. What do we do? Well, what if God is three things? Let's go with that, Jim. That sounds awesome. Yeah. Okay, people are totally going to buy this.
Yeah,
right?
that's a bunch of theological exegesis that comes in hindsight.
A lot of shit came in hindsight.
Well, can we agree, though, that the 10 Commandments were put forward by this Moses guy to try and...
We don't know that. Like, the 10 Commandments were attributed to Moses.
Right.
But we don't know whether or not, A, Moses was a real person, and we don't know, B...
Actually, there's a lot of theologists that don't take the whole story of Exodus as being real.
Right.
As being, factually true.
There's no archaeological evidence to suggest that Exodus was real.
Right.
Wandering the desert for 40 years, you'd think you'd find some clay pots or something in the desert somewhere if they're wandering around for that amount of time and that amount of people.
Well, they were wandering. They weren't carrying their pots around.
But they would have had to set up camp at some point somewhere, and there's no evidence whatsoever of a Jewish settlement crossing the desert.
But regardless, I think we've interrupted.
Oh, right.
Well, what I was getting at is that it does seem to be trying to establish ethics. This is what goodness looks like. This is what being a good person is supposed to be like. I guess
superficially, yeah. Like if you look at it just on the surface, you can make an argument to say this sounds like something that could be considered ethical. But then you start picking it apart and just throwing other circumstances at it in hypothetical situations, and it falls apart.
Right.
Easily.
By making it too solid, then you lose ethics. Kind of thing. Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, it was the attempt. We can say it was an attempt to try and be good.
It was an attempt. It was a shitty.
To try and establish. It was like there was an attempt to try and write down what goodness would look like. Because whenever I think about the whole God thing and the whole religion thing, I always think of it as an attempt to put into people that aren't thinking, I guess you could say. Some goodness, here's a direction, go this way, sheep, kind of thing. Am I?
Well, it's certainly used in that regard.
So yes, absolutely. It's basically an attempt to codify the co-opting of the concept of morality, right? Like this is basically the Bible saying, those things that you actually already think is right and wrong, we're going to say that, no, these are things that we're commanding of you.
These are officially right and wrong now because we say so.
But another interesting thing is that okay, so like you were saying to me earlier offline about how the Ark of the Covenant is supposedly this thing that contains
The commandments.
The tablets with the 10 Commandments on them.
You know, the thing that melted the guy's face in Raiders.
Yeah,
yeah.
that thing in Indiana Jones that melted the guy's face. But like that thing doesn't exist, right? We don't have that.
There is no
like,
ark.
we can't look at the the tablets with the commandments on them. But one thing we do have is the stele with the Code of Laws of Hammurabi, right? Where there's like 200 some laws that were dictated by King Hammurabi long before the biblical Exodus and Moses' time.
The eyes and teeth guy.
Right. The eye for an eye guy.
Yeah.
Right? And actually, I think the Old Testament explicitly lifts the eye for an eye.
It certainly does.
Law, which is actually like almost word for word.
Yeah.
Just totally plagiarized.
Oh, but that's
off
the
of
Old
Hammurabi.
Testament. That's the Old Testament. We have the New Testament now. But what about the Ten Commandments? Sorry, it's another tangent.
Yeah.
Can I tangent on that for a second?
Yeah, go ahead.
The whole idea that, well, now we have Jesus and the New Testament, so all the bad shit in the Old Testament you can kind of forget about because he's come to fulfill the covenant. So, well, what about the Ten Commandments? Oh, you still need those. Well, why? Well, because they're the Ten Commandments. What you just said that he fulfilled the
Doesn't
covenant.
Jesus also explicitly say, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the old laws; I have come to fulfill them"?
Yes.
Yeah, and he also speaks of being imperfect in comparison to God and stuff like that. In terms of the Bible that I was reading today, like he will explicitly go, "I am not as perfect as God is," kind of thing. God is perfect. I'm just trying to give you what I know of my Father.
Yeah, I mean, it's true that there's an argument to be made that Jesus actually never implies or says that he's divine.
Right.
Like that, or that he's basically some kind of special non-man.
Well, see, there are a lot of excluded books of the Bible that allude to the fact that Jesus was not divine. He was just some guy, right? Like Buddha or whatever. The Buddha the first.
Well, yeah, and there seems to be evidence that he was actually Buddhist. That
Right.
He went and studied with some Buddhists for a while.
Yeah, according to some stories, that might be, I don't know. But like the point is, the early church specifically chose the books we have in the Bible now that indicated or hinted at the divinity of Jesus because they wanted to foster that image and do away with all this while he was just a guy business, right?
Get rid of the whole Mary Magdalene relationship thing and her bit of the Bible. Right. They wanted to make him supernatural.
They wanted to make him...
So they pushed those books.
Yeah, they wanted to make him superhuman. They wanted to make him part of God, which is why they created the whole Holy Trinity thing to reconcile this incongruent idea of Jesus just being some dude preaching the gospel according to the Jews, right?
Well, they had to basically retcon the whole.
That's exactly it.
The whole Messiah prophecy thing,
Yeah.
right? And they had to sort of engineer the narrative so that he could be kind of shoehorned as the fulfillment of the prophecy to.
They carefully
to
crafted
retroactively validate the previous
right.
Doctrine, or not doctrine, but dogma, or
everything in the Old Testament that the coming of the Messiah. They retconned Jesus into fulfilling that role by carefully crafting this image through the rejection of all these other testaments and other books, like the Testament of Judas and all these other things that exist in Dead Sea Scrolls and all these other books, the Gnostic texts, the Gnostic Gospels, and because they retconned him into fulfilling the prophecies. Yeah. Very easy to do 700 years later, or whenever these books, the actual Bible that we have today, came to be, right? Yeah, might have been just 5 centuries later.
No, that was like 400 years later.
Yeah. 4 or 5 centuries later.
Yeah, with what's his name there? Constantinople, right?
Constantinople. Emperor Constantinople.
Istanbul was Constantinople.
Classic.
I knew that was coming.
It had to happen eventually.
The only reason why I dragged us there was so that I could sing.
So I find it funny, though, that in a sense, there are people that seem to be outside of these laws of God, and they're the people that are speaking directly to God. Like there are those in the Bible that are speaking to the burning bushes, and they receive dictation from God.
That's the weird
that seem to be outside of the rules of God, but they're putting forward rules for those that only believe in God because they're not knowledgeable of God.
There's like these guys. There's these guys that take themselves as elites or whatever, and they say, "Yeah, you know what? When you guys weren't around, and I went up and isolated myself way over there." God, the unquestionable, all-powerful being, he spoke directly to me, and I'm just conveying his message, and you just need to believe me.
Well, how do we know he talked to God? How dare you question God? And that's how we got to where we are today.
Pretty much.
It's the how dare you question God mentality of the ravings of a lunatic who spent some hours in a mountain at some point.
Well, we can't really know what the effect of the world would have been without religions, in the sense of looking at the people that do not receive dictation from God, like the followers of the religion that I guess you could say only believe, like they're just following orders, kind of thing. They're the sheep of the world.
Well, we could look at microcosms of like specific areas that have never been exposed to Western religions,
right?
And we can extrapolate from that to a certain extent what the rest of society could possibly have looked like without the spread of those religions,
right?
Like tribes in Africa or whatever, or in what's that name of the tribe in the Amazon that never had a concept of the supernatural?
Yeah.
I can't remember.
Well, they just called those the uncontacted.
Oh, they didn't have any sort of concept of supernatural?
They had of a supernatural deity. They had no concept of a god at all.
Okay.
Right. We mentioned...
Oh, wait, are you talking about the Piraha?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Where with the linguist that said that they don't have recursiveness in their language?
Right, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so like if you take a look at that type of society, is it possible that other societies could have developed along those same lines had religion not been introduced?
Right. Right away, it's almost as if it reeks of religion comes about through distance from God. Like,
religion comes about...
Like, as in, if you had no concept of God, you would then therefore be with God. If you had no concept of it. You would be possibly living your life more attuned to nature and things like that. So
more God-like, without necessarily having a concept of God.
It's almost like religion itself reeks of the distance from God.
You would be more godly if you were...
not exposed to
if you were living in harmony with all of God's will and creation.
Well, at the same time, I think we only have to look as far as our own indigenous societies in Canada before the introduction of colonialism. Right? They had their own concepts of like naturalistic...
what could be called religion, yeah.
Right, naturalistic religions or in a way they're kind of supernatural in their thinking, but it's not to the extent that we have...
I think it's more sort of authentically mythical.
Yeah.
In the sense
the stories
in the sense of mythicism that existed like in pre-ancient times.
Right. The stories being transmitted in order to communicate an idea about the human condition, for example, right? Allegories and metaphors being told as stories about like how the world came about and all this other stuff when they couldn't explain it in any other way. You know, the authentic, if you will, religion.
Yeah.
I hate using that term, but it sounds more accurate to describe it that way because it's just stories. You know, if you go back far enough in time, we've always been really great storytellers. You know, as far back as ancient history, we can find evidence on cave paintings and whatever of people just sitting around and telling these mythical stories about our origins and where we came from, because it was a pastime. It was something to do, and eventually.
Well, not only that, like you're talking about like pre-written word, right? So at some point we still had that need to convey information and educate ourselves about where we came from and where we can go.
Right.
And so all of that stuff was just done through storytelling.
Right.
Right.
And the thing is, people tend to forget that these stories tended to evolve with time and transmute and change and evolve and mutate until we get to religion. Every religion, I would argue, has its origins in these mythic storytelling ideas. Eventually they just became so codified that they became religious and like dogmatic.
Right.
They forget
Not only
about
that, it's like
that
it's
almost
like
becomes its expression of the stagnation of it.
Right.
As soon as it's written down, it's too late.
To me, it's like they become copyrighted by some private interest.
Yeah.
Like
Right.
some private interest manages to corner the market on them or whatever, and then slap on some kind of ownership, and then they systematize it and make it into some artificial kind of...
It's like what the Christian church did to all the pagan gods or whatever, like, and the pagan holidays. Like, well, these are ours now.
Yeah.
Right? We own them. Your whole
Easter and solstice and
your Saturnalia shit, no, that's Christmas now.
Yeah.
We own that. It's part of us. So adapt or get the fuck out.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Socrates often.
I kind of find that like sorry, go ahead.
I was going to talk about Socrates not wanting to.
I like that.
He was against the written word. To him, it was about the moment and the discussion in the moment. As soon as you write something down, you're susceptible to disease, basically, and it would fester disease.
I mean, I remember finding it like a remarkable fact that like the most famous, like sort of the prime philosopher, right?
Yeah, never wrote a thing.
Wrote a thing down.
It was
like we have zero writings from Socrates.
Exactly.
All we have
are secondhand
all we have
accounts.
is what Plato told us about Socrates,
Right.
basically.
Which is why people question
Plato...
whether or not Socrates actually existed.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are records of Socrates' trial and execution.
But aside from that, there's
and there's
little
corroborating witness accounts from people who we have more records of. So we have more evidence for Socrates than we do of Jesus.
Right.
As a real man.
Yeah.
As a real person.
As a real
first
guy.
of all.
I'm a real boy.
He was a real boy, yeah.
He was a real boy.
No strings to hold.
But I mean, if you want to be super cynical and distrusting of the concept of eyewitness accounts or records at all, then yeah, you can.
That's another thing that gets me about the Christians who argue against challenging the historicity of Jesus. It's that, well, we don't have any real evidence for the existence of Caesar, do we? Aside from these secondhand, fuck off. It's not just about having.
There's this kind of equivocation.
Yeah,
there. Yeah.
We have evidence of the things Caesar did and the effects of Caesar's reign all over the goddamn place, across the entire fucking Roman Empire. Right? We know that Caesar was a real boy.
Yeah.
And he did actual.
All we have evidence of in relation to Christ is evidence of Christians.
Yeah. Yes.
Literally, that's it. We
Right.
have evidence
Christians
of Christians.
Exist. Christians exist. They existed.
Yeah.
But what about the central figure of their religion?
If you look at all the people that they're gonna call on to try and confirm the existence of an actual Christ person, they're gonna call on Josephus and Tacitus, and these guys talk about Christians.
Right.
And then you've got those interpolation kind of bits that seem like they want to talk about a Christ who was executed. But for one thing, it's pretty clear, even among religious scholars who studied the text, that those were inserted into those historians' texts later. But also, when you're talking about Christians, you might want to describe what is a Christian, and they're just going to say those are the people who follow a guy who was executed on the cross and died and rose 3 days later.
Right.
Well, recounting that's what a Christian is, that bit about what a Christian believes isn't than a description of a fact.
Yeah, it's not evidence for the existence of a Jesus.
No, it's you're not directly sort of telling the story of Jesus. You're telling the story of what Christs think about Jesus. You know,
right.
Christians.
Right.
Yeah, like it's stories about Christians are not evidence for Christ. Yeah.
Anyway, how did we get there?
I don't remember.
Okay.
I think Luke said something about Socrates.
Oh yeah, right.
It was real good.
He's a real boy.
No, I think you had just made like an offhand comment about us not even necessarily knowing if Socrates existed because Socrates was against writing things down.
Writing things down.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Right.
And,
yes,
and you were talking about the. Sorry, go ahead, Luke.
It's something that Lacan brings up. This idea of the written word is both it's a curse and not a curse. Like, sure, we can do some great things with it, but we can do a lot of fucking terrible things with the written word as well. You know, as soon as we think that something is solid, we're fucked.
Well, just
like,
look at all the
reality itself can't be chopped up into pieces.
Well, it's like the fact that we have that cliche of "it is written."
'Tis written.
You know, remember what was it? There was this children's TV show in the 80s where there was like a guru that would like pluck his stringed instrument and say "'tis written."
Oh man!
And then there was also like a Frankenstein in there.
Yeah.
And a witch with a cauldron and.
I know exactly. Vincent Price was on it.
Yeah, Vincent Price was in this show. What the hell show is this?
Isn't it some variation on Frankenstein name or something? It's like the
something monster. Shit, that's gonna. If anyone listening can remember the show with Vincent Price and all these other characters.
God, I loved that show.
Yeah, no, it was on really early in the morning. I remember that much, like at 6 a.m. because I used to wake up when my dad was going.
It was one of the first shows that you watch on Saturday morning. Yeah. When you're getting up for the Saturday morning cartoons.
Wasn't it like Castle of like not Frankenstein, but like some variation of it?
Yes.
Castle of like Frankenstein or Franken.
No. It was something. It was something along those lines, but. Fuck!
Well, whatever. We'll find it afterwards, right? We can't think of it now.
The Great Space Coaster?
No,
is that something else?
The Great Space Coaster?
Yeah, do you remember that?
How about the Secret Railroad? Do you guys remember that?
Okay, we're totally off.
Okay, we're totally going off on a tangent here.
How did we get here?
How did we get there? Sorry, I'm blanking. I don't know how we got there. Yeah, so you were talking about Lacan?
Oh, don't let me do that.
Don't let me do that.
You were mentioning the dangers of writing stuff down.
Oh, right. The dangers of language is basically what I'm saying.
I like the dangers of the written word thing. Just look at
it is written. Yeah.
Look at all the shit you can do on fucking Twitter. Just as an example of the damage you can do with a written word, right? Bad shit. Bad shit happens.
Yeah. Like, in that sense,
Well, it's like Ken Ham when he's debating...
Oh, fuck Ken Ham.
When he's debating Bill Nye, and he's constantly using the Bible to justify what's said in the Bible.
It was, if you haven't...
What's wrong with people?
It's a 2.5 hour debate.
Yeah.
Between Bill Nye and creationist Ken Ham, head of the Noah's Ark Museum.
And this Ken Ham guy, basically, his argument boils down to, well, we know what's in the Bible is true because it's in the Bible.
Right.
And the Bible says it's true.
Because the Bible.
Yeah.
I loved Bill Nye's opening argument for that debate. Because I think he was given like, I don't remember how much time, but he spends the majority of his time, Bill Nye, talking about his bow tie. It just goes on and on and on about his bow tie. And then in the last couple of minutes of his opening statement, and by the way, here's why you're wrong. It was just fucking, it was amazing.
It sounds a bit mocky. I'm always a little bit disturbed when Bill Nye is almost mean, like because like sometimes he gets.
Because he's supposed to be a children's character, a children's.
But he brought the facts to this debate.
Yeah.
And Ken Ham just keeps going on this circular argument. Well, because it's in the Bible, and the Bible's the word of God because it says so. Well, no, like, no.
Yep.
Just no.
Just no.
I can't stand that. Well, why should we take anything? Why should we believe anything that's in the Bible? Well, because it says so. It says so. It's the word of God. Well, how do you know that? Because it's in the Bible.
I mean, when we look at what's in the Bible, like let's look at those other commandments that come after the arbitrarily segregated first 10.
There's just so much in the Bible. Like it's saying all sorts of stuff, you know. Like
well, some of those commandments that come in like Exodus 21 through 23. There's stuff about animal sacrifice, how to keep a slave. Also,
how to sell your
surprising
daughter.
Injunction against murder that I talked about earlier. So you know, what's the deal with thou shalt not kill earlier?
There's also
thou shalt not kill isn't referring to murder since murder is covered over here. And then there's also like thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. Basically, is one of the. I don't know if it's stated in that exact.
Oh no, it is. It is. Yeah.
So it talks about witches, you know, which is like.
Imagined crimes like witchcraft are condoned or condemned
Actually,
in the Bible.
I love the idea of witches, you know, because that's like weird paganism, right? That's weird paranormal paganism.
Well, I think of paganism as the origins of Christianity.
It feels almost like what's the word? Like not anachronistic because that's specific to something being out of time, but like. It's the equivalent of that for something.
It's incongruent. Again, I want to use the word incongruent a lot in this episode.
Okay. Sure.
Okay. I've heard.
Yeah, like it talks about that injunction against witches. It talks about how to sell your daughter.
Yeah.
You know, if she gets raped or whatever, then you know you have to fucking. It's madness. Exodus 21 is pure madness.
The worst thing in there for me is all the stuff about like. How to properly keep a slave?
Yeah,
you know, like the rules about slavery.
How to keep a slave.
How to buy
if your slave if your slave is a Jewish one, then you can only keep him for 6 years.
Unless, and there's an unless there.
Oh yeah.
You know.
Right. Unless he declares his fealty to you and he doesn't want to give up his own wife.
Then
or
you
something.
put a nail through his ear and you own him forever.
That's right, and you keep him forever.
Yeah. And there's like you can beat your slaves as long as they don't die within a couple days.
Yeah.
You can beat them as long as you don't put out an eye or a tooth. You know. There are
these
rules and
God,
regulations.
Like directly laying out all of the work saying that he wants slaves to be a thing.
Exodus 21.
He wants part of his creation to be
subjugated.
To be subjugated and treated with horrible disrespect.
Yeah. Yeah, like Exodus 21 lays out all the rules and regulations for owning, buying, and treating your slaves.
Not to mention, like right in that last of the 10 commandments, the covet thy neighbor's wife and chattel and ass and all that kind of stuff. That's automatically, yeah. That's automatically implying that women are property, right? So automatically. That means that God is saying that 50% of the human race is less than the other 50%.
Well, like later on in the New Testament, according to the New Testament, you know, women are worth half the opinion of men. You know, and like the whole thing about women
that's
not being.
Fucked up. How are there any female Christians?
I don't. That boggles my mind.
How does that work?
How can a modern feminist be a Christian? You know, it just doesn't sit well. It just doesn't make sense. You know, especially because women can't have an active role in at least the Catholic Church. You know, because the man is the head of the household, just like Peter or Paul or whatever is the head or Jesus is the head of the church, right?
Yep.
I can't remember the exact passage, but it's something along those lines. And either way, it's fucking bullshit. Mm-hmm. You know, women are inferior to men in the Bible. So, like you said, how can women justify being Christian? How?
Yeah.
Any women listening out there...
I'd love to hear that. I'd love to hear how it's rationalized by those that actually...
Oh, because it makes you a better person. How? What part of the Bible makes you a better person? Certainly not the 10 Commandments, because we've covered that.
We've pretty much...
You know,
have we actually covered that? I mean, we haven't...
started to.
We haven't really... gone through them one by one. So the first 3 you were saying...
Right, the first 3 are completely amoral, have nothing to do with
morality. Have nothing to do with morality. Then the 4th one is remember the Sabbath.
Right. How is that a moral pronouncement?
Actually, yeah. So I guess the first 4 are basically
amoral. Is it a moral pronouncement? I guess it is for God. God's trying to protect it. It's still more God trying to protect himself there.
Right.
That one.
What's the next one?
The next one is honor thy father and thy mother.
Which we've covered.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there are definitely instances in which
it presupposes that the father and mother are
honorable.
Yeah, right.
Are honorable. Yeah, right.
Worthy of being, honored.
Yeah, yeah.
Next.
Right, it could have just said honor the honorable.
How's about that? Number 6 is thou shalt not kill. And what's up with like arguably one of the most basic kind of moral instincts that anybody could have, which is not to murder the guy next to you? How is it only the 6th one?
Why isn't that bumped up a little bit in the list?
Doesn't even make the top 5, for Christ's sake.
It comes after the amoral, no idol worship or whatever.
Seriously?
Can you guys think of any...
Hold on a second. I want to continue going through the list and going about the morality of them.
And what's up with like the Bible is full of capital punishment everywhere. So what the fuck is thou shalt not kill supposed to mean?
Right. Okay, next. What?
Thou shalt not kill
Unless God tells you to.
Number 7 is thou shalt not commit adultery.
Right. Okay. So.
But the funny thing is, adultery was specific to women. First of all, because men were explicitly allowed to take multiple wives, to have concubines. There's no case in the Bible where a guy gets condemned for adultery.
Does the Bible at any point explicitly define adultery, aside from looking at a woman with lust in your heart?
Yeah.
I don't know. But...
do they actually define that as adultery?
It says, if you look at another woman with lust in your heart, you have committed adultery. But I don't think the Bible actually defines what it means by adultery at any point in the text. I'm not sure. I don't know. I don't know if it does. But... You can.
I mean, that undermines my point that adultery is specific to women, though, because it says a man shouldn't look at another woman with lust in his heart and calls that adultery.
Right.
But if adultery is what we contemporaneously know to be or think of as being unfaithful to your partner, then in that case it is specific to women because men can have multiple partners.
That's a problem.
Don't have to be.
See, we don't know because it's just so fucking vague, right? Mm-hmm. And the whole adultery thing, while on the surface it seems like it's a moral thing to not commit adultery, you can probably make an argument about why it could be considered either amoral or moral to do so. Right? Like if I don't know. I'm not gonna. I can't think of an argument for it at the moment, but you can probably come up with one. Next.
Yeah.
Okay. The next one.
Good one, Mark. Good.
Thank you.
The next one is number 8, and that's thou shalt not steal.
Covered that one already. Stealing a loaf of bread to feed your
right,
starving
the
family.
Robin
Look,
Hood thing.
during Hurricane Katrina, the people who were looting all these stores, to survive during a crisis when the government wasn't bailing them out in time.
Right. Steal from the government is fine. Stealing from Walmart is A-okay. Kind of thing.
Yeah, and that kind of just makes me think of like Richard Nixon who came up with that whole when the president does it, it's not illegal,
Yeah.
So like when God tells you to steal, or when God himself God can't steal because everything is his, but if God tells you to steal and to murder everyone but the women or something like that, then and take all of their stuff and take all of their wives after you've killed them all and all that kind of stuff.
It's in the Bible, folks.
That's not stealing because God told you to do it. So stealing is not stealing when you're stealing for God.
Are you saying God is Richard Nixon?
I'm saying God is Richard Nixon.
No, but you're right that God, in a sense, if God is speaking directly to you,
if the president does it, it's not illegal.
God can ixnay anything. Any rule is out the window.
That's
like
what I was
Abraham,
getting at.
you go take your son up to the mountain and you kill him because I asked.
Well, that's what I was.
But
getting
it
at.
also
no logic to it at all.
No,
just to see if you'll do it. Just go.
What that should tell you is that the concept of morality in a Christian worldview would be that there's nothing inherently moral about morality, morals and ethical commandments and pronouncements or rules or whatever. They're not because of of them actually being good. There's nothing inherently good or bad about a good or bad thing as identified by Christian morality, because really they're all just capricious kind of inclinations that God voices to you, and you would not be able to suss out whether or not they're actually good.
It's
so
moral
you can't
or immoral just because God says so.
Yeah, it's basically just God's capricious whim.
And like you said, if he changes his mind,
God,
what could have been considered immoral at some point, according to God's capricious whim, could then be considered moral the next day.
It could be suggested, though, that God only speaks to those that are good. I think that's...
And on what basis do you judge what's good? Just the fact that God has spoken to them? That's completely circular.
No, you're right. There's no basis there other than that's what the Bible is saying, that this was a good man and so God was speaking directly to him, kind of thing.
Yeah, but they would say God is a good man because God spoke to him.
Right.
Or that guy was a good man because God spoke to him. You know what I mean?
It's completely circular.
It's Epicurus is the guy who said the problem with divine command theory, basically. I mean, I don't remember the actual quote.
Loosely paraphrasing.
Yeah, what Epicurus said that is something good because God commands it, or does God command it because it's good? And I can't remember what the end of that. There's something like if A, then.
Anyway, all I remember is those two first interchangeable things. But yeah.
Anyway, there's kind of it just highlights the circularity there. That if you're gonna adhere to divine command theory, you're basically giving up on the idea of there being objective morality, right? Because there's that means that there's nothing actually good about the things that you think God commands as being good.
Right. And I think, yes, there is objective morality, but what I mean by that is not absolute morality. I mean that you can objectively evaluate the actions and consequences with respect to well-being based on the situation you're in.
Yeah. Insofar as people more kind of colloquially and intuitively count as being moral.
Right.
Things that people understand as being moral, they have an instinct that something being good, there's something to that beyond just something that they think they remember God arbitrarily identifying explicitly in his text as being as being what he wants and therefore good.
Yeah, we have that instinct because we're a social species, and we evolved from ancestors who followed that line of thinking, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's an
we've adapted adopted, I should say.
Part of morality is an evolutionary trait,
right?
Right,
and that's what people tend to forget, especially in the Christian denominations.
Yeah.
Anyway, next commandment.
Hereditary memes. Okay, so we were at steal. Number 9 is thou shalt not bear false witness.
Right, and we talked about that one already. In passing, I don't know if you covered many.
Don't falsely accuse.
And then the last
really
one.
As general as don't lie, but everybody says that not bear false witnesses. Everybody kind of just takes that as synonymous with thou shalt not lie.
Yeah.
But clearly that's not what's intended here.
Well, even the thou shalt not lie as a commandment, you can make an exception for.
Well, obviously there's exceptions for all of these. Thou shalt not kill, we've said over and over again, has a bunch of exceptions. God tells you explicitly to kill, so obviously there's an exception.
Right, and we have to kill to stay alive in general.
Right.
Yeah.
Food.
And we have to
That's
kill
what food is.
in order to stay alive.
Food is death, everyone.
Food is death.
Food is death.
Food is death.
We eat death, everyone.
Plus, God actually commands beyond the arbitrary first 10.
It is
God
very
commands
possible.
the burnt offerings and the animal sacrifice. So he's telling you to kill animals.
The whole Passover thing.
Maybe God just wants us to die. I never thought of that.
Maybe, yeah.
Maybe.
He regrets his creation.
And what's the problem with killing people if you just go to heaven anyways?
You can just repent on your deathbed and you're fine.
Yeah, exactly.
But what I mean is that why is there a fear of death in the first place if you're just going to heaven anyways? Why is being alive such a great thing?
Because according to the Christian
well,
doctrine,
that's a big atheist argument.
Why
actually,
don't
yeah,
all
right?
Christians just commit suicide?
That-
They're not allowed to commit suicide.
Because it's
Yet
a
that's
sin.
not one of the commandments.
No,
though.
it's a sin, though.
It's a sin,
It's a mortal
but
sin.
not a
You'll go to hell.
commandment. Where does that idea of a sin come from, other than the Ten Commandments? I thought the Ten Commandments were like the rules, and then everything else is what, just tacked on? Like, oh, side note, don't do this and don't do this as well.
I think the mortal sins are the more passive of the commandments.
Well, some of the mortal sins are in there, right? Like envy is number 10.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So
that's one of the 7
some
deadly
of them are
sins.
built into them.
Yeah,
but
God is
It's weird that they're not explicitly.
Why aren't they linked?
Why aren't they explicitly linked? Like the first 7 of the 10 are the 7 deadly sins.
And then you got your 3 capricious God ones at the
what the
top.
hell? Yeah.
Very disorganized.
It's very. Come on, guys, get your shit together.
So after not bear false witness, you've got number 10, and that's covet.
The coveting.
The coveting. Yeah. The coveting.
That could be a great movie. I like it. I'm gonna write. That's my next novel. The coveting.
The idea that I'm getting here is that the Ten Commandments are an attempt to lay down some foundations for morality.
Very shitty attempt.
And it's not necessarily a shitty attempt, other than the God stuff at the beginning.
Have you not been paying attention to the last hour?
I just mean that there's nothing that we can say that can be foundationally right or wrong, really, because different circumstances dictate different things.
You're absolutely right.
But is there anything you can possibly think of that can be laid down as being strictly right or wrong?
No.
Really? No, not really.
No, I can't, and that's why, like I said, when I talk about morality, it's the evaluation of actions and consequences with respect to the well-being of conscious creatures, and it's entirely situational. What could be considered moral in one situation might be considered immoral in another.
Right.
It really depends. So I don't think there is any kind of absolute morality. There's objective morality in your evaluation of your actions and consequences with respect to well-being. But absolute morality, no. There's no 100% right or wrong for every given situation, right? It will depend on each individual situation and the circumstances surrounding it.
Yeah, and you talked about relying on instinct, in a sense. And instinct is, in a sense, something that has to be developed. Like, I think, right away I think of Picard, Captain Picard, letting Hugh go, the Borg.
Right.
Right.
He lets him go. And then later on goes, oh, fuck, maybe that was a bad decision, and maybe I made the wrong decision there. You can't know.
No, you can't know.
You use your instinct at the time.
You can use all the available information you have at the time to make what you think is the most moral action that you can take in that situation. But there's no way of knowing 100% whether or not you're right? So it's circumstantial. Morality is circumstantial. It's situational. People tend to make it more complicated than it actually is, and people tend to overcomplicate it. But really, it will depend on the situation that you're currently facing. Because within every given situation, there's a set of one or more actions that you can take that will comprise the most moral action that you can take, right? And it's up to you to figure that out when you're faced with that situation. Mm-hmm. That's my final thought.
That's your final thought right off the bat.
I feel like final thoughts are immoral.
Hey, now.
Actually, if I would like to give up my final thought just to go through the 10 alternative commandments.
I didn't say we were finished yet.
Oh, there's alternative commandments?
I'm just reserving that as my final thought for later.
Oh, okay, gotcha. So what I wanted to read were Christopher Hitchens' alternative commandments.
I fucking love this. Go for it.
So yeah, our whole thing here of this critical appraisal of the Ten Commandments is totally a thing I think that you, Mark, would have gotten from Hitchens, right? I mean,
in part,
at least in part. I mean, we have our own reason and stuff like that.
No, I'm completely blind sheep thinking about nothing else but what people tell me to.
But yeah, Hitchens is definitely an inspiration for this topic here.
Never heard of him.
So anyway, Hitch basically ripped apart the Ten Commandments, just as we've done here, and famously so. But he also came up with his own Ten Commandments.
Oh, okay. All right, let's hear
him. In Vanity Fair. So Hitch, number 1 says, commandment number 1: don't condemn people on the basis of ethnicity or color. So wouldn't that be great if the Ten Commandments included an injunction against racism,
Fantastic.
Which everybody knows is one of the greatest character flaws ever, and you just shouldn't do it.
Well, he's pointing out a narrowness of mind and going, don't be so narrow.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah.
Number 2, don't even think of using people as property or slaves. Like how are the commandments, which aren't limited to the top 10 in the Bible, how are the commandments actually not only not including slavery as one of the bad things, but it's actually telling you how to do it.
Yeah.
It's basically the commandment is to have slaves.
It hadn't even gotten to the place in their mind where they thought all people were people.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So anyway, Hitch at least thinks that one of the top 10 should be not having slaves.
Okay.
I guess that makes Hitch...
right away...
Right off the bat, Hitch is more moral than God, first of all.
More moral than God.
Well, yeah.
Number 3, despise those who use violence or the threat of it in sexual relations.
Ooh.
Say that again? Say it again?
Despise those who use violence or the threat of it in sexual relations. Or
okay, I would add to that and say non-consensual violence in sexual situations.
Sure, yeah, because I'm not sure he necessarily meant to disparage people who are into
violent sex,
sadomaso kinks, that are consensual.
And this is a very real thing. And
Mr.
this
Gray
is not only men, this is also women that like to be, there are women out there that want to be punched while having sex.
Or choked or whatever.
Yeah. Like, that's a real thing.
There are guys
like, there
who
are
want to
some
be
women
too.
that do want to have sex with, what's his name, Jion Gameshi. Like, they want to have that kind of sex.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
Right. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Number 4, hide your face
as long as it's consensual. Sorry. Go ahead. Oh, sorry. Oh, no.
Number 4, hide your face and weep if you dare to harm a child. Yeah. I mean, one of the huge problems we've got is trafficking and everybody on the left and right.
What if it's a lesser harm
to
teach the lesson of a greater harm, right?
What's that?
Like slap a child to stop them from burning themselves severely or something like that, I'm thinking of like Wittgenstein teaching his kids.
Like a reactionary slap to get the hell away from the stove.
I just mean that a bit of harm can be a part of the learning process.
I think we can take intent into account here, and that kind of chiding in the rearing of a child is actually meant to build the child up, right? To make something of the kid. And to protect them going forward.
A minor harming to protect from a larger harming.
Right. Well, it's something done that might inflict pain on a short-term view, but is actually meant to do the opposite of harm. It's meant to help.
Right.
The kid's development.
There's a scope of time.
I think what Hitchens is getting at here is
right away we're justifying this guy, but fuck God, let's justify this guy.
Yeah. Let's totally be hypocritical. No, I mean I think he elaborates. On it, and it's pretty clear he's talking about child abuse, and like pedophilia and
there's more context to this than we're giving.
Yeah, but somehow, like in the Bible, you can put kids to work and own kids as slaves, and
never
you can
says
abuse
not to.
children. You can murder children as long as God tells you to.
The whole killing of each firstborn for several generations or whatever with the Egyptians and shit that happened.
Well, that wasn't a good thing in the Bible, though.
Of course not.
No.
Well, it on some level it was, because it's something that God did.
As in...
And if God does it,
As
it's
in,
cool.
God killed all of the firstborns, including the pharaohs.
Well, wasn't it someone going out and killing the kids
No,
to
God
try
did.
and track
No,
down...
God did it.
That sounds like a really bad defense in court.
I was getting confused with the movie Willow. I'm sorry.
That happens a lot. Okay, so number 5, do not condemn people for their inborn nature. And Hitchens...
Inborn nature.
Well, Hitchens kind of contextualizes that or specifies. He's talking about things like homophobia, right? Like if you're like, God basically created a big chunk of humanity, like about 10% or whatever, as homosexual, and this is part of their being. They were born that way, right? And yet you're gonna condemn them and
For the way that God made them?
and basically treat as a sin something that for you is not a choice that you even make, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, you don't even have an inclination to make it because you happen to have been born with the correct inclination or whatever. Anyway, the thing that I found kind of funny about that is that I don't really see that as all that much different from his number 1 commandment about, like, condemning people on the basis of ethnicity or color. I find that kind of...
Right, he should have just
the
been
same.
a little more all-inclusive in that one.
Sure.
Not just ethnicity and color, but other variations of thought process
Don't
or
condemn people for who they are.
natural
Yeah.
inclinations. Right.
Yeah, their inborn nature. Okay, number 6, he had, be aware that you too are an animal and dependent on the web of nature, so act accordingly. Basically,
Like we said earlier.
environmental responsibility
Yeah,
is
and-
one of his commandments.
And we all kill to survive.
Right, you are a part of
way.
a
You're
larger
part
system.
of an ecosystem.
Right,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
We're part of the universe.
Know your role.
That doesn't sound so much like a commandment, though.
Well,
So-
I mean, it should be, right? Like,
to
like
know your place
like
in the universe.
apparently,
Well, I almost feel
it's not immoral for a small group of humans to get together and build an institution which actually destroys our limited environment for their own purposes and to the expense of everybody else.
Yeah, like we're
Like, that's immoral. That's like the biggest immorality, one of the biggest immoralities that you can think of, right?
we're part of
Like
an
what we've done.
We're
Like the
part,
fact
yeah,
that corporations are out there.
raping the
kind
earth.
of-
Right away, I think of white man, not corporation. Like, white man took over the world and fucking...
Like, people forget that we're part of an ecosystem. We're part of this planet. We're not dominating it, right?
Yeah.
We're integral to everything that exists on this planet. Is
And the funny
interwoven.
thing is, in the Bible,
You have dominion over Earth and everything in it. And all
yeah,
that shit,
exactly.
yeah.
They're basically telling you the opposite. They're basically giving carte blanche to the creation of raping and pillaging industries that basically do everything that they can
It's true
to
that-
exploit
Right.
the earth that they.
Christianity kind of goes with the you are everything, whereas Buddhism, for example, would go you are nothing. The exact opposite
Yeah.
sort of thing.
Let's see what's next here. Number 7. Don't imagine that you can escape judgment if you rob people with a false perspective rather than with a knife. So I think this
right
is
away, these commandments are much more
what.
much more something.
You're pursing your lips.
Can
in
you say
thought.
that?
I
again?
almost feel like this is the same as the bearing false witness.
I think it comes in the same place as it.
It's basically saying not to be a judgy dick.
Don't be a dick.
You
Don't
say it
be
again,
a-
though? How does he phrase it?
Don't imagine that you can escape judgment if you rob people with a false perspective rather than a prospectus rather than with a knife. So he's saying that
Don't be a dick.
that falsely judging someone
Or falsely putting something forward, it seems.
Yeah. Is a kind of theft.
You're thievery.
You're stealing something of the character of the other person. Or
I have a bit of a problem with that one in the sense that you can only really know until you put it forward. Like you can't know until you put it forward, and then your surroundings put it down and
well, I think there's intentionality that's kind of built in.
I think what he's really getting at is just to respect one another. Just
honesty, right?
Yeah, be honest with each other. Be respectful of one another.
Well, in that sense, there's no need for rules, and just respect each other, and then there is no rules.
Sure. Yeah.
If we all just loved each other and treated each other with respect, and not only treated each other with respect, but actually respected everything and everyone, there would be no problem, and there would be no need for rules at all.
Yeah.
It would all just fall into place.
George Carlin has a bit that's that goes into the Ten Commandments, and his bit is actually about distilling them down to like
2 or 3 or whatever.
Be honest, the top 2 or 3.
Just don't be a fuck.
Don't be a dick. Don't be a dick. That's my one commandment, by the way. Don't be a dick.
Just don't be bad.
Slavoj brings up this idea of Christianity is all about just pretend and everything's going to work out great for you. It's bullshit.
Number 8 is turn off that fucking cell phone.
That's a commandment, yeah.
That's one of his commandments.
And turn off your cell phone. See, that one doesn't really hold up because we're reading your ideas on a cell phone. So I mean,
yeah, turn off that fucking cell phone.
We'll turn it off as soon as we're done with you.
He's obviously being facetious to some extent.
And number 10.
No, number 9.
Oh, sorry,
maybe
number 9.
Maybe God was being facetious. Laying down rules.
Maybe. Although it doesn't really sound from the rest of the Bible that like God has much of a sense of humor.
Not so much.
Number 9, unless you count platypuses. That's
platypi?
Like
hilarious joke. Yeah.
Fucking hilarious.
God was high on PCP one day and just went to town.
What's he trying to pull? Okay. Number 9, denounce all crusaders and jihadists for what they are, psychopathic criminals with ugly delusions and terrible sexual repressions.
Hooah.
Number 10...
Wait a second, denounce?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fuck jihadists. Fuck crusaders.
Yeah.
Because their ideas are bullshit. It's just... Kill somebody in the name of God? Fuck that.
It's the arrogant imposition on you, of your own
dogma.
Your own dogma and your own kind of arbitrary moral dictates or whatever.
I guess what I'm getting at is not to denounce the individual caught up in those ideas, but the ideas themselves.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah. Anyways. Number 10, be willing to renounce any god or any faith or religion if any holy commandments should contradict any of the above.
Placing himself above the 10 Commandments with that one. Love it.
And he basically gave a TLDR at the end of
that's almost up there
at the end of this article saying basically TLDR, don't swallow your moral code in tablet form.
Classic Hitch. Classic Hitchens wit on that one.
Yeah.
Love it. Okay. I think we've run the gamut on the 10 Commandments. I've given my final thought already about 10 minutes ago.
Well, I think he just more wisely worded things. I mean, and it's just more current.
Right.
It's not just more current though. Like I think it's a glaring omission, and it's not just a cultural or time contextual kind of thing that slavery is permitted in the moral code of the Bible. Slavery in particular just shouldn't be like a relativistic kind of choice that's just like, okay, you do okay, you guys can do slavery, but we just choose not to do slavery.
Slavery
is wrong.
Always immoral. It was always immoral.
Well, and what of capitalism, and where do we draw the line in terms of what is slavery and what is not slavery? I mean, people are doing a lot of shit and just thinking they have
if
to
nothing
do it.
else, can we at least agree on consent, right?
Yeah.
Like a slave is someone who didn't consent to be owned.
Well, immediately I think of the character that Samuel L. Jackson plays in
Django.
he's submitting to slavery.
Well, he's basically sort of exploring a way to exploit the circumstances under which he's definitely going to be a slave, but he figures out how he can at least lift himself out of the worst circumstances of slavery to the point where he actually helps to enslave. And abuse other slaves, right?
I'm just not exactly sure where we draw the line in terms of what is slavery and what is not slavery. I think this is another podcast altogether. What
slavery?
What exactly is slavery? You know,
right?
Mm-hmm.
In what we can consider
indentured
now,
servitude and
now being what I would think
slavery.
is probably the end of capitalism. You know, I mean, I think a lot of us are going to work going, why am I doing this, and what is this that I'm doing? You know, exactly. But yet there's the need to do it just to stay alive, kind of thing, right?
How about we talk about that during the next episode?
Yeah. It's like Hammy Hamster. That's another story.
Sounds good.
But for now,
final
thoughts on the issue of the 10 Commandments. I've given mine. Luke, what are yours?
Well, I don't like to have final
thoughts. I know
you
don't.
As you well know. So, you know, go fucking fuck yourselves. No, I don't know.
That's so moral.
Hey, whoa, no.
I'm sorry. Was that included in the 10 Commandments? Then go fuck yourself.
Thou shalt not
Mark, Jill, go fuck yourselves.
The first and last of Luke's commandments is go fuck yourself. Thou shalt
That's
not fuck yourself.
That's my only commandment.
My final thought is be good.
Yeah. I gotta say, I can really only speak confidently in terms of compassion for all life, really, right? So, yeah, that's going to be my final thought forever.
Your repeated final thought for every episode will be act with compassion.
Yeah, sure. Let's try and build up some compassion for life in general.
I can agree with that. Like,
especially those that are fucked. Like, let's say, people following the 10 Commandments.
Be compassionate.
No, that's not true. Because, I mean, people following the 10 Commandments, it's not necessitating that they're evil or anything like that. It could be
just that they're not thinking for themselves.
Yeah. Is it possible some people can't? No.
Can't think for themselves?
Yeah. Like, they haven't developed that ability. Like, the idea of the sheep, you know?
Yeah.
Like in the Bible, that comes up a lot.
Like if you think
for
about,
you
like,
who can't think, for you who don't know
the
God
child
for real.
psychologist Piaget.
Yeah.
And he had, like, the moral stages of development with, like, child development and how kids, as they grow up, they have different ways of doing morality. Like they go through the stage where what's moral is what your dad and mom tell you is what you should do.
Is that the early stage?
And then, I guess that's an earlier stage, and then the later stages are like when you start to question the rules, or another stage will just be that morality is following the laws and the rules, and another one is morality is sort of beyond the rules and is like what informs the rules, you know, like when you start thinking on that level.
Right. People haven't gotten there.
No,
a
exactly.
lot of people haven't gotten there.
This concept of the 10 Commandments being like sort of a be all end all for ethics, for ethical theory, is really dumb. Like,
yeah,
it's super narrow to be thinking that this very short rule book that is not exhaustive and also like just sometimes not even relevant to morality is just not adequate. Like,
how can these 10 simplified or simplistic ideas be all encompassing of the human condition?
Yeah.
It
can't. Can we trade out not being allowed to be an artist, which is like the no graven images? Because the no graven images one, commandment number 2, it's like some people say that one is also the no false idols thing, but no, the false idols thing comes later with the no other gods before me and that kind of stuff. But really, he's saying no graven images, like no no creativity at all. Creativity is my bag.
I'm the creator.
And I do creativity, and I don't want other people doing creativity because that's my thing.
Yeah, I'm
don't
creative.
Step on my toes.
You're not creative. I'm the creator.
Yeah. So I find that to be like explicitly kind of immoral, actually, to be stunting the human experience that way, while also excluding something as obvious as slavery from being one of the injunctions that you shouldn't engage in. You know,
right?
It still bothers.
Or racism.
It still bothers the hell out of me that the first 3 commandments are all about God's capricious, egotistical little behavioral
God trying to
problems.
protect himself, yeah.
And then the slavery is just condoned during the from Exodus 21 to 30.
Mm-hmm.
Explicitly condoned.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's it for me.
That's it for me.
That's it for me.
This has been Critical Junction episode 57. I'm Mark.
I'm Luke.
I'm Jill.
As always, thanks for listening. And until next time, keep thinking critically.
And go fuck yourselves.
No, don't go fuck yourselves.
Okay, fine.
Keep
love and peace.
Keep thinking critically.